Oh, you really thought they were done with you. You thought the dust had settled, the tension dissolved, the conversations died out because people finally grew up and moved on. You assumed the quiet meant peace. You assumed the distance meant closure. But while you've been rebuilding yourself in private, something else unfolded behind your back, something far more revealing. They called a meeting, not a casual discussion, not a random group chat explosion, an actual, deliberate gathering centered on one subject only: you. And this time, the footage didn't stay hidden. Someone recorded it, someone leaked it, someone decided the truth needed to reach the one person they never wanted to see it. Let that sink in before anything else. They met about you, intentionally, purposefully, urgently. Adults with jobs, responsibilities, families, routines, paused their lives to sit down and discuss a person they insist they no longer care about. That contradiction alone tells you everything. When people truly move on, they don't meet in private rooms to dissect someone's existence. They don't schedule conversations to revisit old wounds. They don't call each other at odd hours because an old feeling resurfaced. They don't gather like a committee to debate your choices, your growth, your behavior, your direction. Yet that's exactly what they did. And the moment the recording leaked, the illusion shattered. Picture the setting: a living room belonging to someone who always pretended neutrality, but was never truly neutral. The place where opinions get shaped before they're expressed publicly. The environment where someone feels bold enough to say things they wouldn't dare say to your face. That's where they met. Chairs pulled closer, phones placed face down, doors pushed shut, curtains half drawn, the atmosphere thick with old resentment, unspoken jealousy, unresolved tension. People walked in acting relaxed, but their eyes told another story. They came with an agenda. They came with questions. They came with emotions they pretended not to have anymore. And don't doubt for a second who showed up. The names you expect, the faces you remember, the ones who stayed quiet when you walked away, the ones who whispered instead of confronting, the ones who sugar-coated their opinions before wearing them like truth. Friends who weren't really friends, family members who masked envy as concern, an ex who pretended to heal faster than they actually did, a coworker who always minimized your potential but somehow never stopped monitoring you. All seated in one space, bound by a single interest, unraveling the version of you they can no longer predict, control, or categorize. The recording begins with casual chatter, but it doesn't stay casual for long. Someone says your name, not once, not as a passing comment. They say it with weight, with hesitation, with that uneasy tone people use right before admitting they've been thinking too much. Suddenly the room shifts, body language tightens, conversations redirect, and just like that, you become the centerpiece, not even present, yet occupying every inch of that environment more fully than any of them did. That's the first clue that you've grown past their understanding. When your presence expands, even in your absence. The first thing they discussed was the shift in your behavior. That's how they phrased it, the shift. Not your progress, not your healing, not your evolution. They framed it like a problem, like something that demanded analysis. Someone said you've been acting different, which really means you stopped playing the role they assigned. Another said you've been distant, which translates to you no longer entertaining their drama. One person dared to add that you've been focused, and even that word made the room uncomfortable. Focus means direction. Direction means momentum, and momentum means you're moving somewhere they can't follow. But the recording captured something deeper than their words. It caught their tone. The tightness, the concern masked as curiosity, the tension born from losing access to someone they underestimated. It's not the shift that bothered them. It's the fact that they weren't invited into it. They noticed you communicating less, posting differently, carrying yourself with a calm they couldn't decipher. They noticed you walking past old triggers without responding. They noticed you choosing yourself without apologizing. And to them, that wasn't independence. It was rebellion. Because people accustomed to a version of you that tolerated their behavior can't handle the moment you update the terms. Then came the second topic, your progress. They didn't call it progress, of course. They called it changes. They called it strange energy. They called it a new attitude. Anything but what it actually is, growth. Because acknowledging your growth forces them to confront their stagnation. Someone said you've been glowing. Someone else said you've been calmer. Someone complained that you've been too confident lately, as if confidence must be justified or measured. The irony is almost painful. They didn't gather because you did something wrong. They gathered because you finally did something right for yourself. And that disrupted their internal hierarchy. One person in that room, someone who always pretended to be above drama, mentioned that you've been pulling away. That comment alone sparked half the meeting. They didn't ask why. They didn't wonder what pushed you to detach. They didn't question their own behavior. They questioned yours. They tried to find flaws in your evolution instead of investigating the reasons behind it. Because in their world, your distance is the problem, not the behavior that made distance necessary. Then came the part of the recording that would have made you pause. Someone analyzed your future like it was a shared concern. They speculated about your goals. They dissected your recent choices. They projected their own fears onto your path. They wondered if you were preparing to leave more people behind. They wondered if you were about to step into opportunities they never thought you'd reach. One even said you're becoming someone else. But the fear wasn't in the becoming. It was in the possibility that the new version of you wouldn't look back. People who expected you to stay small hate seeing you stand tall. People who counted on your insecurity resent seeing your clarity. People who relied on your softness panic when you develop structure. That's what the recording revealed. Not their interest, but their fear. Fear of losing access, fear of losing relevance, fear of being remembered for the damage instead of the contributions, fear of watching you rise while their own lives remain painfully predictable. But here's where the recording becomes something else entirely. Because in the middle of the noise, someone in that room wasn't aligned with them. Someone recorded everything quietly, steadily, without hesitation. Not to harm you, not to manipulate the situation, but because they saw something unhealthy unfolding. They saw how much energy was directed toward a person who wasn't even present. They saw adults obsessing over someone who had detached gracefully. And something inside them shifted. Maybe they finally recognized the unfairness. Maybe they got tired of the hypocrisy. Maybe they realized the conversation wasn't about helping you. It was about controlling a version of you that no longer exists. So they hit record. And when the meeting ended, they didn't delete the file. They didn't bury it. They let it make its way to the very person it centered around, you. And whether they meant for you to see it or not, the footage landed exactly where it needed to. There's a moment near the end of the recording where the truth cracks open. Someone asked, "Why are we even talking about this?" Notice, not in defense of you, but in frustration with themselves. Someone realized the conversation had turned obsessive. And then another voice answered with something raw, something they probably wish hadn't been captured. They said, because they're doing better than all of us combined, and nobody understands how. That sentence changed the entire temperature of the room. It carried resentment, envy, confusion, and admission all at once. It was the line that revealed why you became the focus again. Not because you wronged them, not because you created chaos, not because you caused trouble. You became the center of their discussion because your progress exposed theirs, because your forward movement highlighted the places where they stayed still, because your internal reconstruction outpaced their comfort zones. Their emergency meeting wasn't about concern. It was about control, about losing influence, about watching someone they expected to break reshape themselves into someone stronger, sharper, more composed, and the footage, the leak only, confirmed what you already sensed but never had proof of. They never stopped watching. They never stopped comparing. They never stopped debating a life they no longer have access to. And now that the footage is out, something even heavier hangs in the air, an unspoken question they never intended for you to hear. If this is how they talk when you're gone, what were they thinking when you were still around? That question opens a door they hoped would stay sealed forever. Because once you walk through it, you begin to see the pattern behind everything they ever did. The sudden shifts in their tone, the moments they fell strangely quiet when you entered a room, the way they could celebrate you publicly while folding envy into their smiles. You begin to understand that their conversations didn't begin after you left. They simply became bolder in your absence. You realize that long before you took your distance, they were already dissecting you in private, already comparing your wins to their losses, already anticipating your breakthroughs with a discomfort they never admitted to. The footage isn't a new pattern. It's the first time the curtain slipped. That's what rattles you. Not because you're surprised by the behavior, but because you're finally seeing it unmasked, unfiltered, unpolished. People who claimed maturity reverted to pettiness the moment your name appeared in the air. People who swore they wanted the best for you couldn't hide the tension when your progress threatened their narrative. People who insisted they had no problem with you carried enough unresolved emotion to fill a conference room. The footage didn't just expose the meeting. It exposed the truth behind years of odd interactions you dismissed as overthinking. Once you understand that, the recording becomes more than a leak. It becomes a mirror showing you who they were while pretending to be someone else. A mirror reflecting the way they exaggerated your flaws to shrink their own. A mirror revealing how tightly they held on to the version of you that made them feel superior. They never wanted you to break. They wanted you to depend. They didn't want your downfall. They wanted your stagnation. And when you outgrew the spaces they tried to keep you in, they lost something they didn't know they relied on. The ability to measure themselves against you. That loss is what forced them into that living room. That loss is what drove them to schedule an emergency discussion about a person who wasn't even present. That loss is what tightened their faces when the leak exposed everything they feared being seen. Because once the footage escaped, the truth was undeniable. Their so-called concern was just a mask stretched over insecurity. Their observations were thinly veiled resentment. Their debates were nothing more than attempts to reclaim a sense of control over someone who had already outgrown their influence. The recording captured something they can't explain away. Their obsession, not curiosity, not casual reflection. Obsession. The kind that grows quietly when someone feels left behind. The kind that sharpens when a person's presence becomes impossible to ignore, even after they leave the room. The kind that festers when a group loses its ability to predict someone they once thought they understood. They didn't meet to talk about the past. They met because your present unsettled them. They met because your progress disrupted the emotional ecosystem they built around underestimating you. They met because the idea of you rising without them was more than their egos could handle, and the footage caught every bit of it. The shifting glances, the defensive tones, the sentences spoken with rehearsed confidence but shaky foundations, the side comments, the tension whenever someone acknowledged that you were doing better, the discomfort when somebody dared to suggest that your distance wasn't a rebellion at all, but a boundary you learned to protect. Every second of that recording showed you something you needed to see. They didn't lose interest in you. They lost access. And losing access awakened emotions they couldn't manage privately. So they gathered to handle them collectively. But the meeting wasn't just about you. It was about what you represent. Their conversation revealed that you weren't simply a person to them. You were a measuring stick. A reminder of what happens when someone stops seeking approval and starts evolving for real. A demonstration of what growth looks like when it's self-directed instead of socially negotiated. A threat not because of malice, but because of momentum. They met in panic, not because you harmed them, but because you no longer orbit their expectations. And the footage, raw, unedited, unguarded, forced them to confront that fear with no place to hide. You have to understand something crucial now. The meeting wasn't spontaneous. Someone initiated it. Someone sent the messages. Someone made the calls. Someone used your evolution as the reason to bring everyone together. That's what the leak makes painfully clear. Your progress became the catalyst for conversations that were meant to stay permanently behind closed doors. And the person who initiated the meeting wasn't the one whose voice you expected to dominate. It was someone quieter, someone who always seemed neutral, someone who pretended the longest to be unbothered. That type is the most dangerous because they suppress their reactions until pressure forces them out. And when that kind of person finally reacts, they don't confront directly. They gather witnesses, they create a circle, they build an echo chamber where their insecurities feel validated. But even inside their carefully structured circle, cracks appeared. The leak caught those moments. A friend who used to praise you slipped into criticism so casually it exposed how long they'd been harboring resentment. A relative who claimed to respect your boundaries suddenly complained that you'd grown too independent. A coworker who always acted unfazed complained that you seemed too confident. An ex who insisted they'd moved on brought your name up more than anyone else. These people weren't just talking, they were revealing, not about you, but about themselves. Their words weren't a reflection of your identity. They were confessions of their insecurities, but the part of the recording that hit the hardest, the part that replayed itself in your mind long after the first viewing, came midway through the meeting. Someone asked, "When do you think they changed?" The question wasn't malicious, it wasn't accusatory. It carried genuine confusion, even frustration, because none of them could pinpoint the moment you slipped out of their emotional reach. They thought they knew you so well, yet your transformation blindsided them. And that's when someone else answered with something that shifted the whole tone of the meeting. They said, they didn't change. They finally stopped shrinking. That sentence landed in the room like a weight. The footage caught the silence after it, the way every face stiffened as if someone had spoken a truth they all recognized but refused to acknowledge. Because the truth was this: you didn't suddenly become someone new. You stopped pretending to be someone smaller. You stopped bending to expectations. You stopped absorbing their projections. You stopped fighting to stay relevant in rooms that didn't respect you. And the moment you stopped shrinking, you became someone they couldn't manage anymore. That's why they met. Not because of your transformation, but because of their lack of one. The leak becomes more interesting when you notice the body language of the person recording. They weren't hiding fear. They weren't covering anger. Their energy wasn't aligned with the rest of the room. They recorded because they saw something unhealthy brewing, something unfair, something that crossed a line. Perhaps they realized these people weren't reflecting. They were spiraling. Perhaps they sensed that the group wasn't trying to understand you. They were trying to reassert the role you used to play in their lives. The recorder saw individuals clinging to outdated versions of you like lifeboats, terrified of what your growth represented. And maybe for the first time, someone in that circle realized you deserved to know just how much of your absence they turned into theater. Later in the recording, the conversation intensified. Voices got sharper. A few people became defensive. Someone argued that you were acting distant. Someone else claimed you were becoming unpredictable. The footage shows that their frustration wasn't fueled by something you did. It was fueled by what they assumed you might do next. They weren't reacting to your choices. They were reacting to their lack of control over your direction. And that is where the root of their panic lies. They can't predict what they no longer influence. They can't forecast someone they no longer understand. They can't manage a person who doesn't rely on their approval. The meeting was simply a manifestation of the power shift they refused to accept. One part of the leak, however, stands above everything else because it revealed more honesty than any of them realized. Someone asked, why didn't they tell us what they were going through? And the reply came instantly, without hesitation, because we never made it safe for them too. That line wasn't meant for the camera. It wasn't meant to be profound, but it exposed something deeper than all their speculation combined. They wanted access without accountability. They wanted presence without responsibility. They wanted the emotional privilege of proximity without offering the emotional labor that comes with it. They didn't lose you suddenly. They lost you gradually, piece by piece, each time they failed to show up when it mattered. The footage caught the exact moment they realized that. The exact moment their defensiveness turned into discomfort. The exact moment someone acknowledged their part in your withdrawal. The exact moment the narrative shifted from blaming your transformation to analyzing their incompetence in handling it. That was the moment the meeting stopped being about you and started becoming about themselves. Because after that, the questions changed. The tone shifted. The energy lost its false confidence. Suddenly the room wasn't discussing you. They were confessing about themselves without meaning to. And that's what makes the leak so powerful. It didn't just expose their obsession, it exposed their guilt. The final section of the recording is the one they never wanted you to hear. Someone quietly admitted, we didn't expect them to grow this far without us. Not said with anger, not with bitterness, but with a stunned tone, as if the idea had only just registered. The meeting had turned into an autopsy of their own misjudgments. They underestimated the person they never thought would outgrow their emotional orbit. And that admission, caught forever in digital form, reveals the core reason they met in the first place. They didn't gather to resolve anything. They gathered because they were confused about how you rose without the support they believed you needed. And that confusion grew into fear. Not fear of you coming back, not fear of confrontation, fear of being forgotten, fear of being irrelevant to someone they once believed couldn't function without them, fear of being exposed for the roles they played in your past, fear that the story you tell now, the one they no longer get to influence, will reflect the truth they've avoided for years. That fear is what triggered the emergency meeting. That fear is what fueled the debates. That fear is what made them raise their voices, pace the floor, defend their perspectives like their identities depended on it. That fear is what glued them to your evolution, like spectators trying to anticipate the next scene of a story they no longer participate in. And now, the footage is in your hands. You've seen their faces when your name is mentioned. You've heard their voices shift when discussing your progress. You've witnessed their discomfort when acknowledging your growth. You've watched them scramble to understand how you rebuilt without needing them. The recording doesn't just show you what they think. It shows you what they fear. It shows you what they regret. It shows you what they can no longer deny. And now they can't control who sees it. They can't control how you interpret it. They can't control the consequences of their own words leaking into the one place they wanted to avoid, your awareness. And that, right there, is the part they didn't prepare for. They were ready to monitor you from afar, ready to compare themselves quietly in private circles, ready to analyze your growth through second-hand narratives. But they were never ready for the moment the conversation turned around, reversed direction, and landed directly in your hands. They wanted the power to talk without being held accountable. They wanted the freedom to dissect you without the risk of being seen. They wanted the illusion of control while keeping you in the dark. But the leak shattered that illusion, and now they are the ones exposed, not you. Their meeting wasn't supposed to escape the walls that contained it. Their words weren't meant to be heard beyond the room. Their emotions weren't meant to be captured raw and unfiltered. And now that they are, the balance has shifted in a way they don't know how to manage, because now they must confront a reality they never expected to face. You know. They don't know what you'll do with the information, but they know you have it. They don't know what your next move will be, but they know it's yours to make. You didn't ask for the footage. You didn't demand evidence. You didn't dig for the truth. It simply arrived, delivered by someone inside their circle who made a choice they didn't anticipate. And that choice carried a message far louder than anything spoken in the recording. Their attempt to control the narrative is collapsing from within. That internal collapse is the true story here. Not just the fact that they met, not just the fact that they talked, but the fact that someone among them was no longer willing to participate in the performance. Someone in that room looked around, saw the insecurities disguised as opinions, saw the bitterness hidden under fake concern, saw the tension rising each time your name was mentioned, and realized this isn't a conversation. This is fixation. This is desperation. This is emotional dependence disguised as analysis. The recorder wasn't just documenting their words. They were documenting the truth behind their intentions. And when someone inside the circle breaks the unspoken pact of secrecy, it means they've already stepped out of alignment with the group. That alone reveals everything you need to know. Not only did they meet to discuss you, but the foundation of their unity is beginning to fracture. But let's step deeper into the psychological core of this. Why did the footage hit them so hard? Why did the leak send shockwaves through people who insisted they were unaffected? Because the video removed the one thing they relied on: plausible deniability. When gossip stays inside the room, it feels harmless, even justified. When resentment circulates quietly, it feels manageable. When projection disguises itself as rational concern, it feels defensible. But the moment the footage goes beyond that room, the moment the words they casually dropped become visible to the very person they centered their conversation around, everything changes. Suddenly their opinions aren't abstract. They are documented. Suddenly their frustrations aren't private. They are recorded. Suddenly their tone isn't imagined. It is proof. That is the power of the leak. It took their hidden discomfort and turned it into evidence. Evidence they can't deny. Evidence they can't erase. Evidence they can't twist into something else. Evidence they can't hide behind excuses or emotional manipulation. The footage shows their raw reactions, their impulsive comments, their unfiltered thoughts. It captures every shift in their voice, every hesitation, every moment their eyes betrayed their jealousy or regret. And that's why they're panicking now, not because they were exposed, but because they were exposed to the one person whose awareness could shift everything. But here's the deeper layer they never considered. The footage didn't just expose their emotions to you. It exposed their emotions to themselves. Most people don't actually know what they look like when envy rises. Most don't know how their face tightens when someone else succeeds. Most don't hear the edge in their own voice when discussing someone they've lost influence over. Most don't recognize their own insecurity until it's played back to them. This leak didn't just confront you with their truth. It confronted them with their own reflection. And that is the one confrontation they cannot escape. Think about this. How many times have they claimed they wished you well? How many times did they insist they were proud of you? How many times did they pretend your distance didn't bother them? How many times did they perform emotional maturity in public while privately carrying unresolved tension toward your growth? The footage didn't expose lies. It exposed contradictions. Their words in that room do not match the persona they showed you when you interacted with them. Their tone in the meeting does not align with the calm neutrality they pretended to maintain. Their reactions in that recording do not resemble the detached indifference they claimed to have reached. The leak didn't embarrass them. It revealed them. And revelation is far more dangerous than embarrassment. But here is where the power dynamic flips entirely. The footage doesn't obligate you to respond. It doesn't pull you back into old stories. It doesn't demand revenge or confrontation. The real impact is far more subtle and far more significant. The recording gives you clarity. It gives you context. It gives you understanding. And with understanding comes the one thing that terrifies them the most: perspective. Perspective removes emotional attachment. Perspective dissolves confusion. Perspective allows you to see people exactly as they are, rather than how they present themselves. And once you see people clearly, they lose the ability to manipulate your perception. The leak took away their last advantage, the benefit of your uncertainty. Now you know. And that knowledge is the storm they can't prepare for. But the footage offered something else, something far more revealing than their gossip. It captured their confusion about your evolution. They couldn't make sense of your progress. They couldn't connect the dots of how you rebuilt, realigned, redirected, and recalibrated without falling apart. They made assumptions. They projected. They analyzed. But every theory they formed had one central theme threaded through it: disbelief. They spoke about you like someone trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly rearranged itself. They spoke about your growth as if it happened overnight, ignoring the years of quiet endurance that led to it. They spoke about your transformation as if it was an act, not a reconstruction. And beneath all their theories, one truth kept rising. They didn't expect you to come back stronger. They expected the distance to ruin you. They expected the silence to isolate you. They expected the absence of their support to break you. They expected you to crumble under the weight of everything you carried alone. But instead, you rebuilt with more strength than when you began. Instead, you expanded beyond the version of yourself they thought they understood. Instead, you detached without losing direction. Instead, you flourished despite everything they assumed would limit you. That disconnect between who they thought you were and who you became is the foundation of the emergency meeting. They weren't discussing your behavior, they were processing their shock. Process that carefully. People don't gather because they don't care. They gather because something inside them is shifting in ways they can't manage alone. Their emergency meeting was not a reflection of your instability, it was a reflection of theirs. Their panic was not triggered by your actions. It was triggered by their inability to define you anymore. Their frustration wasn't about your choices. It was about their fading influence. They gathered because watching you rise created a void where their control used to exist. And humans often fear voids more than threats. A threat they can fight. A void they cannot. That is why the footage contains moments of anger, moments of confusion, moments of regret, and moments of something deeper, unspoken mourning. They weren't mourning you. They were mourning the version of you that made them feel comfortable, the version of you that needed them, the version of you that tolerated their half-efforts, the version of you that accepted their insincerity, the version of you that gave them the emotional advantage. You didn't lose them. They lost access to the earlier version of you that no longer exists. And that is the loss they were truly grieving in that room. The leak also exposes a truth that none of them wanted to admit. Someone in that room understood you better than they realized. Their comments weren't harsh. They were accurate. They described your growth with clarity. They recognized your self-awareness. They acknowledged your direction. They admitted your strength. They saw the difference between who you were and who you've become. And the recorder caught their quiet recognition that your evolution wasn't an accident. It was earned. Their voice wasn't loud. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They were simply stating what everyone else was trying to deny. Your progression was intentional. Your healing was deliberate. Your transformation wasn't impulsive. It was overdue. And that acknowledgement, spoken so calmly in the middle of all their panic, was the line that separated truth from noise. You see, the footage didn't just show you the dynamics you escaped. It showed you the dynamics you outgrew. These people weren't reacting to your present. They were reacting to the future they sensed forming ahead of you. The emergency meeting wasn't about what you did. It was about what you're becoming. They see the trajectory even when you don't speak about it. They see the growth even when you don't display it. They see the elevation even when you don't announce it. They feel the shift in your presence even when they're no longer close to it. Their fear isn't that you've changed. It's that you're continuing to change, and they can no longer predict or influence the direction. But the footage also revealed something else, something far more important for you than any detail they discussed. Someone in that room was uncomfortable the entire time. Their posture was off. Their eyes avoided direct contact. Their comments were hesitant. Their energy didn't match the rest. And near the end of the recording, their discomfort reached a point that they couldn't hide anymore. They spoke up, not to defend you, but to break the toxic pattern unfolding in front of them. They said, Why are we acting like we didn't contribute to the distance? That question didn't accuse you. It held them accountable. It reminded the room of everything they overlooked, dismissed, or justified. And the moment that question was asked, everyone froze. Because accountability wasn't part of their agenda. It never is in meetings like these. They weren't discussing you to gain clarity. They were discussing you to avoid self-reflection. And that's exactly why the leak matters. It forces them into a position they didn't prepare for. Responsibility. They can't hide from the footage. They can't pretend they didn't say what they said. They can't reconstruct the narrative to paint themselves as innocent. The leak took the private version of them and placed it in the light. And the moment private truths enter the public space, excuses disappear. They aren't debating you anymore. They're debating the consequences of being seen. But the most important part of the recording, the one that changes the entire tone of this story, comes near the very end. After the last argument, after the last excuse, after the final attempt to rationalize their behavior. Someone whispered something almost too soft for the microphone to catch. The recorder zoomed in slightly, and the audio picked up 4 words that silenced the entire meeting. They said, "What if they already knew?" Those words rewired the room instantly. Because if you sensed their tension earlier, if you felt their distance before leaving, if you recognized the mismatch in their tone, if your instincts alerted you to something off, then the leak wasn't news. It was confirmation, and confirmation terrifies people far more than discovery. Discovery is accidental. Confirmation means you saw everything long before the evidence arrived. That realization hit them like a tidal wave. Your intuition wasn't a guess. It was accurate. Your withdrawal wasn't random. It was strategic. Your boundaries weren't abrupt. They were necessary. And the footage proved that your instincts were sharper than they ever wanted to admit. That is why Part 3 ends differently than they expected. Not with revenge, not with confrontation, not with chaos, but with clarity. Because the footage revealed everything you needed to understand, not about them, but about yourself. They gathered to regain control. The footage proved they never had it. They gathered to discuss your growth. The footage confirmed it. They gathered to analyze your choices. The footage exposed their reactions. They gathered to talk about your direction. The footage showed their stagnation. They gathered to reclaim power. The footage handed it back to you without you lifting a finger. And now, here you stand, with awareness they never expected you to hold, with proof they never intended you to see, with knowledge they never prepared to face. You don't need to reply. You don't need to address them. You don't need to set the record straight. The footage already did that for you. Their words became their own consequences. Their meeting became their own mirror. Their leak became their own undoing. Their emergency gathering became the exact thing that revealed how little control they actually possessed. Because the moment the footage escaped, the story changed, and so did you.